When I tell you, you speak, not 1 second before. I have carried those words for 30 years now, longer than I carried my own grief, longer than I carried the shame they tried to bury me under. A stranger said them to me on the worst day of my life, and somehow they turned out to be the truest thing anyone ever gave me. But I am getting ahead of myself, the way old women do. Let me go back to the beginning, to the dust and the heat and the silence I thought would last forever. It was the autumn of 1879, and I was 23 years old and already certain my life was over. I boarded the Concord coach in Yuma on a morning so hot the air shimmered above the rooftops, my whole ruined existence packed into one carpet bag and a small leather-bound trunk that had belonged to my husband. Samuel had been dead 4 months by then. The trunk was nearly all I had left of him, and I did not even know what was in the bottom of it, beneath the folded shirts and the broken pocket watch. I only knew it was heavy, and that I could not bring myself to open it all the way. I was going home to Sweetwater, a hard little ranching town 3 days east across the desert, where I had grown up the daughter of a respectable family, and where everyone now knew exactly what a fool I had made of myself. I had run off with Samuel Hart against my father's wishes and my brother's open contempt. My father had died that winter, some said of the disgrace, though I think it was simply his heart giving out, the way hearts do. And Samuel had died in the spring, branded across 3 counties as a cheat and a swindler, a man who had taken other men's money and left them with nothing. I did not believe it of him, but belief is a quiet thing, and the world is loud, and a young widow with empty pockets and a dead man's bad name learns very fast that no one is waiting to hear what she believes. My brother Nathaniel ran the family freight business now, and the family conscience besides. His letter had reached me in Yuma 2 weeks before, and I had read it so many times the creases had gone soft as cloth. "You may come home," he had written in that cramped, careful hand of his. "There is a room. You will keep house and you will keep quiet. You will not speak his name in this town again, not to me, not to anyone, so long as you live under a Whitfield roof. Let the dead bury the dead, Margaret, and let us pretend, for the sake of the living, that none of this ever happened." So that was the price of my homecoming. Silence. 3 days of staring out a coach window and then a lifetime of it. I told myself I could pay it. I told myself I had earned it. I climbed into that coach and took a seat by the window and folded my hands in my lap like a woman folding away the last thing she ever wanted to say. The seat beside me stayed empty as we rolled out of Yuma, and I was grateful for it. I did not want a stranger's elbow against mine. I did not want conversation. I wanted to disappear into the rocking and the rattling and arrive home already a ghost. There were others in the coach with me. A thin drummer with a sample case who slept with his mouth open, an old rancher's wife who clicked her knitting needles like a clock counting down, and one gentleman I will come to in a moment. But the seat at my side stayed empty for the first long hours, and I leaned my head against the hot leather and let the desert blur past, gold and gray and endless, and I made myself as small and as silent as I knew how to be. That was the ride I expected. A silent ride home, and a lifetime of regret waiting at the end of it. I did not yet know about the man who would take the seat next to me. We changed teams at a way station that was little more than a sod hut and a water trough baking under the white sky. The horses were lathered and blowing, and the driver, a leathery man named Pell, climbed down to see to the harness while we passengers stretched our legs in the shade of the coach. I stayed near the wheel, my husband's trunk by my feet because I did not trust it out of my sight, though I could not have told you why. That was when I first saw Eli Marsh, though I did not know his name yet either. He came out of the heat haze on foot, leading a sorrel pack horse, and at first I took him for part of the landscape, some weathered outcrop that had stood up and started walking. He was enormous. He stood a full head taller than the driver, and his shoulders strained the seams of a buckskin coat that was scarred and sun-faded and dark at the cuffs with old work. A heavy beard, shot through with premature gray, hid the lower half of his face, and a broad-brimmed hat sat low over eyes I could not yet see. He carried a long rifle in the crook of his arm, the way other men carry a newspaper, easy and unthinking, and there was a pistol at his hip and a knife with a bone handle at his belt. He smelled, when the wind shifted, of wood smoke and horse and the high clean pine of mountains I had never seen. He arranged passage with the driver in a few low words I could not hear, and when he stepped up into the coach, the whole vehicle seemed to settle on its springs under his weight. The drummer woke and pressed himself against the far wall. The rancher's wife stopped her needles. There were 2 empty seats by then, one beside the gentleman across the way and one beside me. He took the one beside me. He did not ask if it was free. He did not tip his hat or beg my pardon. He simply folded himself down onto the bench, his rifle laid across his knees, and looked straight ahead, and took up so much of the seat that his shoulder pressed warm and solid against mine no matter how I shrank toward the window. I sat rigid, my heart going quick and shallow, and I told myself I was afraid of him, and that was partly true. But it was not the whole truth. The whole truth was that I had not been touched, not so much as brushed against with any kindness, in 4 long months, and the simple animal warmth of another living person at my side undid something in me that I had thought safely locked away. The coach rolled on. The afternoon ground down toward evening, and the heat did not break so much as change its color, going from white to gold to a deep bruised amber. Dust came up through the floorboards and hung in the slanting light, and it got into my throat until I had to press my handkerchief to my mouth to keep from coughing aloud, because coughing felt like speaking, and I had already begun my lifetime of silence early. A canteen appeared in front of me. The mountain man held it out without turning his head, the battered tin of it scratched and dented, the stopper worn smooth. I stared at it. Propriety, that old reflex drilled into me since girlhood, lifted its head and told me to refuse. A lady did not drink from a stranger's canteen. A lady, especially a disgraced one, did not take a single thing she had not earned. "No, thank you," I said. And my voice came out cracked and small, the first words I had spoken aloud in 2 days. He did not lower the canteen. "You'll dry up to nothing being polite," he said, and his voice was low and rough, like stones turning over at the bottom of a creek. "Drink." It was not a request. There was no menace in it either, only a kind of flat certainty, the way you would tell a child to come in out of the rain. I took the canteen because I did not have the strength to keep refusing, and the water was warm and tasted of tin, and it was the best thing I had ever drunk in my life. I handed it back and managed a whisper of thanks, and he gave a single nod and stoppered it and said nothing more. It was the gentleman across the coach who finally drew me into talk. Mr. Vincent Crane was everything the mountain man was not, and at the time I counted that to his credit. He was perhaps 40, slim and well-made, in a gray traveling suit kept somehow clean against all the dust, with soft hands and a soft voice and a face made for sympathy. He had a way of leaning forward when he spoke to you, as if your answer were the only thing in the world that interested him. He had been watching me, kindly, for some miles. "You've the look of someone going home," he said gently, and not gladly. "Forgive me. I have made the same journey myself." And because he was gentle, and because the silence in me had been cracked open by a stranger's canteen, I answered him. Not everything, God knows. But I told him I was a widow returning to family in Sweetwater, and he made a small sound of sorrow that seemed entirely real, and he said that grief was a hard country to cross alone. He spoke of his own losses in a low murmur, a wife, a brother, and his eyes went soft and damp, and I thought, here at least is one kind soul on this terrible road. I told him my husband's name. I should not have, but it had been bottled in me so long, and it felt like setting down a stone I had carried too far, just to say it once aloud to a stranger who would not judge me. "Samuel Hart," I said. I did not see the way Mr. Crane's eyes flicked, just for an instant, toward the leather trunk at my feet. I did not see it. The mountain man beside me did. But he said nothing then, and I went on talking to the gentle stranger across the coach, grateful for the warmth of being listened to, never once suspecting that of the two men, I had chosen exactly the wrong one to trust. The road dropped down into a wide, dry wash in the last red light of the day, and that was where they were waiting for us. I felt the coach slow before I understood why. Then I heard Pell up on the box swear once, low and ugly, and haul back on the lines, and the whole coach lurched and shuddered to a halt in a rolling cloud of its own dust. Through the window I saw 3 riders strung across the wash with rifles up, faces masked with kerchiefs, hat brims pulled low. A 4th sat his horse off to the side, and even masked I could tell he was the one in charge by the lazy, watchful way he held himself. The way a man sits when he has done this many times and expects no trouble. "Strongbox," he called out, and his voice carried easy across the still evening air. "And whatever's in the coach worth carrying. Hands where I can see them and nobody gets buried out here." The rancher's wife began to pray under her breath. The drummer made a high, thin sound. I felt my own breath go shallow and fast, and the old silence clamped down on me hard, the silence I had been ordered into, so that even in my terror my first instinct was to make no sound at all, to be small, to be quiet, to not be seen. Beside me, the mountain man moved. He did not stand. He did not so much as raise his voice. He simply leaned a few inches toward the open window, his rifle sliding into his hands as smooth and natural as a man reaching for his hat, and he spoke into the dusk in that low creek-bed rumble of his. "Reuben Doyle," he said, "you've gotten careless taking coaches this side of the river. Used to be you had better sense." The silence that followed was a different kind of silence than mine. It was the silence of a man hearing his own name where he did not expect it. The lead rider went very still. The horses shifted and blew. "Who's that talking?" Doyle said at last, and there was a new caution under the laziness now. "Somebody who knows the Bounty Wells Fargo's got standing on you," the mountain man said. "Somebody close enough to put it through your eye before your boys clear leather. You know how this goes, Reuben. You count the cost. There's nothing in this box worth your life, and you've got more years behind you than most in your trade. So you turn those horses around and we forget we saw each other and you go on breathing. Or you don't. Makes no difference to me which." I have thought about that moment many times in the years since. There was no shouting in it, no flourish, no fired shot. There was only a quiet man stating a hard arithmetic, and 4 armed men working the sum and not liking the answer. I learned something in that dry wash that I have never forgotten, that the loudest thing in the world is sometimes a steady voice that is not afraid. Doyle sat his horse a long moment. Then he laughed, short and without humor, and lifted his rifle barrel toward the sky. "Another time, then," he said, and wheeled his horse, and the 4 of them melted back into the gathering dark the way they had come. We rolled on. No one spoke for miles. The rancher's wife wept silently into her shawl, and the drummer drank from a flask with shaking hands, and Mr. Crane sat very still and pale, and I could not stop looking at the man beside me, who had gone back to staring straight ahead as if nothing at all had happened. It was full dark, the desert cold coming up fast the way it does once the sun is gone, when I finally found my own voice again. "Thank you," I said. "I think you saved all our lives." "Doyle saved them," he said. "I just helped him see it." "My name is Margaret," I said. "Margaret Hart." And then, because the dark made it easier, because a man who faces down 4 guns without flinching seems somehow safe to tell things to, I told him the rest. I told him about Samuel, and the elopement, and the bad name my husband had died under, and the room waiting for me in my brother's house and the price I had to pay to live in it. I told him about the silence. I told him I was going home to be quiet for the rest of my life, and that I supposed I deserved it. He listened the whole way through without once interrupting. He did not pat my hand or murmur that it would all be well, the way Mr. Crane surely would have. When I had finished, and the last of it had gone out of me into the cold dark, he was quiet for a long while, and I thought perhaps I had finally said too much even for him. Then he said, I knew a fellow once who got buried under a lie like that. Folks decided who he was, and it was easier for everybody if he just stayed quiet and let them. So he did. It didn't bring him any peace. He turned his head, and in the faint starlight through the window I saw his eyes for the first time, gray and steady and not unkind. A woman who buries the truth to keep folks comfortable isn't at peace, Mrs. Hart. She's just quiet. There's a world of difference, and you'll learn it sooner or later, one way or the other. I did not answer him. I did not know how. But I felt the words land somewhere deep, the way the canteen had, undoing a lock I had thought would hold forever. Across the coach, in the dark, Mr. Crane was watching us both. And though I could not see his face, I would later understand that he had heard every word, and that somewhere in my telling, in the name Samuel Hart and the mention of all I had left of him, he had found exactly what he had been hunting for all along. They came back for us at the abandoned relay station, in the gray hour before dawn. Pell had pulled in to rest the team in the lee of the old adobe walls, a roofless ruin from the days before the war, and we had climbed down stiff and cold to stretch and wait for light. I remember the morning star hanging huge and white over the eastern hills. I remember thinking, foolishly, that we had come through the worst of it. Then the shooting started. It came from the broken walls all around us, muzzle flashes blooming orange in the half-dark, and the air was suddenly full of the flat, hard crack of rifles and the whine of lead-off stone. Pell went down by the lead horse with a cry. The drummer screamed and ran and was driven back by a bullet that kicked dust at his heels. Doyle's voice rang out from somewhere in the ruin, no longer lazy now, sharp and commanding, ordering us pinned down, ordering the coach taken. Eli Marsh moved like a storm breaking. He had me by the collar and behind the thick adobe of a fallen wall before I had finished drawing breath to scream, and then he was up over the top of it, his rifle speaking in a steady, terrible rhythm, and a man cried out in the dark and did not cry out again. I crouched in the dirt with my heart slamming, the cold seeping up through my hands, and I clutched my husband's trunk to my chest without even knowing I had grabbed it. That was when Mr. Crane took it from me. He had crawled to me through the chaos, and I turned to him with relief flooding through me, because here was the kind gentleman, here was an ally. "Mr. Crane," I gasped, "thank God are you." His soft hands closed on the trunk and wrenched it from my arms, and the look on his face stopped the words in my throat. The sympathy was gone. The softness was gone. What was left was cold and hungry and entirely without pity, and in that instant, in the gray light with the guns hammering all around us, I finally understood. "It's in here, isn't it?" he said, low and fast, fumbling with the catch. "Hart's ledger. The little fool actually kept it. 4 months I've waited, 4 months following you across this God-forsaken territory, and you carried it under your own dead husband's shirts the whole way." "What are you?" I began. "Your husband was an honest man," Crane said, and he said the word honest like a curse. That was his whole trouble. He found out where the money was really going, and he was going to take his little book to the law. So I saw to it he didn't, and I saw to it the world remembered him as the thief instead of me. His thumb found the catch. And now I'll have the only proof that ever said otherwise and burn it, and there won't be a soul left alive out here to tell a different story. And there it was. The whole truth of it, 4 months of grief and shame turned inside out in the space of a breath. My Samuel had not been a swindler. He had been a man who would not stay quiet, and he had died for it. And the gentle stranger who had wept false tears across the coach had been the one who killed him. Every instinct I had built over 4 months screamed at me to be silent. Silence was safe. Silence was what I had been ordered to keep, what I had told myself I deserved. Crane was already turning away with the trunk, the truth about to vanish into the dawn forever, and Doyle's men were closing in, and the easy thing, the quiet thing, was to let it all happen and survive and go home and never say a word. I did not do the easy thing. I stood up in the middle of that gunfight in the open, with the lead still flying, and I screamed at the top of my lungs in a voice I did not know I owned. "He's the one who robbed you. Vincent Crane. He's the inside man, he set this coach, he's no passenger. He's the one taking your share, Doyle. He's got your money in his book right now. The words tore out of me, raw and enormous, and they carried across the ruin the way Eli's quiet voice had carried across the wash, and they did exactly what I prayed they would. The shooting stuttered. Doyle's head came up. Out there in the gray, the men who had ridden for Crane's gold heard a widow shrieking that their own paymaster was robbing them, and confusion is a contagious thing among thieves who trust no one. For one heartbeat, one single precious heartbeat, every gun in that place hesitated, and every eye swung toward the slim man in the gray suit clutching the trunk. It was all the time Eli Marsh needed. He came over the wall like an avalanche. His rifle barked once, and Reuben Doyle, half risen from his cover to see what the screaming was about, was flung back against the adobe and slid down it and was still. Crane spun, clawing a small pistol from his coat, and fired wild, and I heard Eli grunt as the shot tore through the meat of his shoulder, saw the dark blood leap out of him into the gray light. But he did not fall. He crossed the last of the distance, and his great hand closed over Crane's gun hand and bent it down and away, and there was a single muffled report between them, and Vincent Crane folded slowly to the ground at the mountain man's feet and did not get up. The last of the gang, leaderless, paymaster dead, broke and ran. We heard their horses scrambling up out of the wash, and then there was only the morning wind and the white star fatting and the harsh sound of Eli Marsh breathing. I went to him. He had sat down hard against the wall, his hand pressed to his shoulder, the blood coming dark between his fingers, and his face had gone gray under the weathered brown. I did not think. I tore a long strip from the hem of my black mourning dress, the dress I had worn for 4 months of a lie, and I bound his wound as tight as I could, and my hands did not shake at all, which surprised me. He watched me work. "You broke your silence," he said, and there was something almost like a smile in the rough of his voice. "I did," I said. "Cost Crane his whole plan, you screaming like that." He winced as I drew the binding tight. "Loudest thing I ever heard. Remind me never to cross a Sweetwater woman." I picked up the trunk where it had fallen, and I opened it the rest of the way, down past the folded shirts and the broken watch, and there at the bottom was a small ledger bound in worn green cloth, full of my dead husband's careful hand. The proof he had died for. The truth Crane had crossed a territory to destroy. I held it against my chest, and for the first time in 4 months I wept, not from shame, but from something that felt almost unbearably like relief. We came into Sweetwater 2 days later, on a borrowed wagon, with Eli's shoulder bound and the bodies and the ledger turned over to the marshal at the county seat along the way. It was a bright, hard, blue morning, the cottonwoods along the creek gone gold with the season, and the whole town seemed to stop and stare as we rolled down the main street, the disgraced widow Hart and a giant of a mountain man with his arm in a sling. My brother Nathaniel was waiting on the porch of the freight office, and his face, when he saw me, was exactly as cold as his letter had been. "Margaret," he said as I climbed down. He did not embrace me. He looked at the wagon, at Eli, at the strip torn from my mourning dress, and his mouth thinned. "There's a room ready, as I wrote. The back stairs. We'll speak of the rest later in private, and then we will not speak of it again. I trust you remember our understanding." I remember the silence that fell then, the old familiar silence, settling over me like a lid. I remember feeling the pull of it, the awful easy comfort of it. I could have stepped into that house and up those back stairs and into a lifetime of quiet, and it would have been the simplest thing in the world. But I had learned the difference, out there in the dry wash and the broken ruin. I had learned what a voice was for. "No, Nathaniel," I said, "I don't believe I do." He blinked at me. I do not think anyone had told my brother no in a very long while, and before he could gather himself, the mountain man stepped down off the wagon, slow with his wound but mountain steady, and stood beside me and spoke. "Your sister's husband was an honest man," Eli Marsh said. I know it for a fact because I rode with Samuel Hart 2 years on the freight lines out of Prescott before he ever met your family, and there wasn't a straighter man in the territory. When the money started going missing, he was the one tracked it. He found out it was a fellow named Vincent Crane skimming the company blind, and he kept a book on it to take to the law. Crane killed him for that book, and paid to have Sam's name dragged through the mud so no one would go looking. That ledger's in the marshal's hands now. Your sister carried the truth across 200 miles of desert and damn near died for it, and she screamed it out loud in the middle of a gunfight when staying quiet would have been a sight safer. So you'll want to choose your next words with some care, mister, because the whole county is about to learn that Samuel Hart was the most wronged honest man in it, and that his widow is the one who cleared his name. I had not known until that moment that Eli had ridden with my Samuel. He had not told me on the coach in the dark when I poured out all my grief. He had simply listened, knowing all the while who I was and what I had lost, and had said nothing of his own connection until the moment it could do me the most good. I understood then why he had been on that road at all. He had been carrying his own kind of debt to a dead friend, and he had been looking for me. Nathaniel's face had gone through several colors. The cold authority I had feared my whole life, the family conscience, the keeper of the silence, stood on his porch with nothing left to stand on, and he knew it, and the town gathering in the street knew it. "Margaret," he started, "surely we can discuss." "There's nothing to discuss," I said, and my voice was steady and clear and carried up and down that street for everyone to hear, and oh, it felt like flying. You wanted me to keep quiet to protect the family's good name, but it was never the family's name that needed protecting, Nathaniel. It was Samuel's, and I am done being quiet about it. I'll be telling everyone exactly who my husband was, for as long as I live, in as loud a voice as I please. Eli Marsh looked down at me, and there was open admiration in those gray eyes now, and something warmer beneath it. "I've got a place up in the high country," he said. "It isn't much. A cabin, some good water, a wide piece of sky. But nobody up there will ever ask you to be quiet, Mrs. Hart. You can say whatever you damn well please, loud as you want, and the mountains will just listen and not say a word back unless you ask them to." He paused, gruff and suddenly uncertain in a way that towering armed men are not supposed to be. "There'd be a place for you in it, if you wanted." I looked at my brother at the cold house, at the back stairs, and the lifetime of silence waiting at the top of them. Then I looked at the scarred, wounded, true man beside me, who had faced down 4 guns with a quiet voice and taken a bullet to give me back my husband's name, and who was offering me, of all things, the freedom to never be quiet again. It was not a hard choice. It was not really a choice at all. "I would like that," I said, "very much." And I took his good arm, and we walked away down the gold-lit street together, away from the cold house and the buried lies, out toward the wide high country and a sky big enough to hold every word I had spent 23 years learning to swallow. I am an old woman now, and Eli has been gone 5 years, and I still talk to those mountains every morning the way he said I could. I tell them about him. I tell them about Samuel, whose name is carved on a clean white stone in the Sweetwater churchyard now, an honest man, the marble says, wronged and remembered. I tell them everything in as loud a voice as I please. Because I learned on a dusty road in the autumn of 1879 the lesson that has carried me the whole rest of my life. They told me silence would protect me. They were wrong. The silence they wanted from me was not safety. It was a grave, dug quiet and comfortable, and I had very nearly climbed down into it of my own accord. It was a stranger's steady voice in a dry wash, and my own broken scream in a hail of bullets that taught me the truth my brother never understood. Staying quiet to keep other people comfortable is not peace. It is only a slower kind of dying. The day I finally spoke was the day I finally came home, not to Sweetwater, not to any house with a roof and a name. I came home to myself, to my own true voice, the one thing in this world that no one, not a swindler, not a brother, not a lifetime of being told to hush, was ever able to take from me again. If this story moved you, If you have ever been told to stay quiet when something in you needed to speak, I would love to hear about it. Leave a comment and tell me which moment stayed with you the longest. And if you enjoy stories of the old frontier, of second chances and hard-won courage and the kind of love that hands you back your own voice, take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel so you never miss the next one.